The hum of the casino floor was intoxicating. Bright flashing lights, the rhythmic ding of slot machines, and the occasional burst of cheers from lucky winners. For most, this was a place of entertainment, an escape from reality. But for Frank Dawson, 76, it had become something much more dangerous. Seated alone at the far end of the row, he hunched over the slot machine, gripping the lever with trembling fingers. His faded plaid jacket hung loosely over his frail frame, his thinning white hair tousled from hours of silent desperation. The screen flashed spin again, and he obeyed, feeding in another bill, his pulse quickening with every turn. This was it, his last chance. A year ago, Frank would have never stepped foot in a casino. He had always been careful with money, saving every dollar for a quiet retirement. But since his wife Margaret passed away, the house had become unbearably silent. His days stretched endlessly, grief gnawing at him, loneliness sinking its claws into his chest. When a friend mentioned the casino, just for fun, Frank, it's a good distraction, he hadn't thought much of it. Now, he was $82,000 deep, his entire retirement savings gone. Frank swallowed hard, his vision blurring. He had promised his granddaughter, Emily, that he would be responsible, that he had everything under control. Lies, he thought bitterly. Emily was only 22, balancing college classes and part-time jobs just to keep their tiny apartment afloat. She trusted him. She believed in him. And he had failed her. The slot machine whirred one last time. His breath hitched as the reels slowed. A cherry, a 7, then a loss. A gut-wrenching realization set in. There was nothing left. Frank's hands trembled as he sat back, staring at the flashing screen. The money was gone. No rent, no food, no security. Just an old man with a fool's dream that the next spin would save him. A sharp voice snapped him out of his daze. "Sir, is everything all right?" A casino attendant, young, polished, with an artificial smile, stood beside him. Frank nodded weakly, forcing himself to his feet. His knees buckled slightly, but he steadied himself against the chair. The attendant glanced at his empty wallet and offered an all-too-friendly suggestion. "We have cash advance options if you'd like to keep playing." Frank felt sick. Even now they were trying to pull him in deeper. Shaking his head, he turned toward the exit. His feet felt like lead as he walked past the rows of machines, past the hypnotized faces, past the flashing neon jackpot signs mocking him. By the time he reached the parking lot, his hands were clammy, his heart pounding with dread. He checked his watch. Emily would be home soon, and she had no idea what he had done. Frank sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the eviction notice in his hands. The paper trembled between his fingers. Final notice was stamped in bold, red ink, demanding payment by the end of the week. The weight of his choices crashed down on him, pressing against his chest like a vice. The front door creaked open. Emily. "Grandpa, you home?" Her voice, light and familiar, sent a fresh wave of guilt surging through him. She didn't know. Not yet. He heard the shuffle of her backpack dropping to the floor and the rustle of her coat as she stepped into the small living room. The moment she saw the notice on the coffee table, everything changed. "Grandpa," she whispered, her voice sharp with alarm. "What is this?" Frank swallowed hard. He had rehearsed this moment, had planned a softer way to break the news, but standing before her, he had nothing. She snatched up the paper, her brown eyes scanning the text, her breath hitching. "Eviction! We paid rent! She froze, and then realization dawned.
Her head snapped up. "Grandpa,
Where's the money? Silence. Frank couldn't meet her eyes. He stared at the floor, shame clawing at his throat. Emily's voice turned to steel. Tell me you didn't. He inhaled shakily. I thought I could win it back. A sharp, bitter laugh burst from her lips. You thought? She ran a hand through her hair, pacing, her breaths coming fast and uneven. Oh my God! She looked at him again, her face a mixture of heartbreak and fury. You lost everything, didn't you? Frank nodded, unable to form words. Emily squeezed her eyes shut, her jaw clenched so tightly it looked painful. I can't believe this, she muttered. I trusted you. That hurt the most. Frank finally looked up. I'm sorry, sweetheart. His voice cracked. Sorry won't fix this, Emily snapped. She threw the notice onto the table, the paper fluttering like an omen. We have nothing now, no rent, no savings, no backup plan. I'll find a way to fix this, Frank stammered. Emily let out a sharp breath, her hands balling into fists. She was trying to contain her anger, but he could see the storm behind her eyes. Then suddenly she stopped. Her expression changed, calculating, determined. Frank recognized that look. She was about to do something reckless. I'm going to get the money back, she said, her voice eerily calm. Frank frowned. Emily, she grabbed her phone and keys. I'll be back. And before he could stop her, she was gone. Emily's heart pounded as she stepped through the casino's grand entrance. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and the stale scent of desperation. She hated these places. Her mother had always warned her about gambling, about the way it could destroy people. And now, her grandfather, her rock, had become its latest victim. She wasn't about to let it go. Her first instinct was to march straight to the manager's office and demand they return the money, but she knew that was naive. Casinos were predators. They wouldn't part with a single dollar unless they had to. She needed leverage. Emily pulled out her phone and started recording, walking through the casino floor with careful purpose. She had done her research on the way here, scanning articles and forums about how casinos prey on the elderly, how they manipulated regulars with free drinks, VIP perks, and fake near wins to keep them hooked. As she wandered past the high-limit area, she spotted them, the VIP hosts, sleek suits, two friendly smiles, watching their clients like wolves in tailored clothing. Her gut twisted when she saw one of them hand a free play coupon to an elderly man not much older than Frank. They knew exactly what they were doing. Emily turned and walked straight toward the security cameras. She lifted her phone, speaking loud and clear. This is Emily Dawson, and I'm here at the Golden Star Casino, where they've just drained my 76-year-old grandfather of his entire life savings. Heads turned, employees stiffened. A pit boss near the roulette tables grabbed his radio. Good! I want everyone watching this to understand how these places work, she continued, panning her camera toward the floor. They prey on the vulnerable. They don't care if you're elderly, grieving, or financially ruined, so long as they can squeeze you dry. A security guard started toward her. She didn't stop recording. They keep the lights dim so you lose track of time. They pump in oxygen to keep you alert. They rig the machines so you get just enough wins to keep you playing, but never enough to walk away. More employees were watching now, some whispering. A manager approached, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a pressed suit. His expression was polished irritation. "Miss," he said smoothly, "I'm going to have to ask you to stop recording." Emily didn't. "Why?" she asked, tilting her head. Afraid of people finding out the truth? The manager's smile faltered.
Emily took a step closer, her voice sharp as a blade. My grandfather was one of your victims. He lost everything here, and I have proof that you target seniors. That's enough, the manager cut in, signaling to security. Escort her out. 2 guards stepped forward. Emily acted fast.
She turned the phone on herself. If anyone watching this has family members gambling here, ask them how much they've lost. I guarantee you it's more than they ever meant to. And then she uploaded the video. Within seconds, notifications exploded. The casino underestimated her. Within an hour, her video had over 200,000 views. By the next morning, 3 million. Social media was on fire. People began sharing their own horror stories. Parents who had gambled away college funds, seniors who lost retirement savings, entire families ruined. By midday, reporters were calling. By evening, the State Attorney General's office had issued a statement announcing an investigation into predatory gambling practices. The casino panicked. Emily received a call from an unknown number. Miss Dawson, this is Richard Cole, the casino's operations director. We'd like to offer you a resolution. Emily leaned back in her chair, savouring the shift in power. Go on. Cole cleared his throat. A full refund of your grandfather's losses, plus an additional $10,000 for any inconveniences. Emily almost laughed.
This wasn't about her.
She crossed her arms. Not good enough. Cole hesitated. Then what do you want? She smiled. I want every senior who lost money here to be compensated. By the end of the week, the casino had no choice but to comply. They announced a restitution fund for elderly victims, paying back millions in stolen money. Frank's account was restored. But more importantly, Emily had exposed them, and she was just getting started. The news spread like wildfire. The headlines were everywhere. Young woman exposes casino's predatory tactics. Seniors win back millions. Golden Star Casino under investigation for targeting elderly gamblers. Granddaughter's bold stand sparks national reform on casino ethics. Emily sat in their small apartment, scrolling through the thousands of comments flooding her video. People from all over the country were sharing their own stories. Sons and daughters revealing how their parents had lost their life savings, elderly victims who had been manipulated into playing for hours, some even suffering bankruptcy because of it. She had touched a nerve, and the casino industry was scrambling to do damage control. A knock at the door pulled her out of her thoughts. She set her phone down and stood, opening the door to find Frank, standing there with tears in his eyes. For the first time in days, he looked like he could finally breathe. Sweetheart. Frank's voice was thick with emotion as he stepped inside. He took off his worn cap, running a hand through his thinning white hair. I don't even know what to say. Emily exhaled slowly. You don't have to say anything, Grandpa.
But Frank shook his head, guilt still evident in his eyes. I do. I messed up, Em. I let myself believe in something that was never real, and worst of all, I hurt you. Emily's chest tightened. She had been angry, furious even. But in the end, Frank wasn't the villain here. He was a victim, just like so many others.
I was just so lost, he admitted, sinking onto the couch after your grandma. I didn't know how to fill the quiet anymore.
Emily sat beside him, her voice soft. I know.
Frank took a shaky breath. But I never should have dragged us down with me. He looked at her, his weathered face lined with regret. I don't deserve what you did for me. Emily reached over, squeezing his hand. You're my family, Grandpa. We don't leave each other behind. Frank let out a deep, shuddering breath, his eyes glistening. I'll never forget what you did for me, Emily. Never. She smiled faintly. Good, because I'm not done yet. Frank frowned. What do you mean?
Emily turned her phone screen toward him, showing an email from a lawyer. I've been contacted by a consumer rights group. They want to take this further. Real regulations, real change.
Frank's eyebrows lifted in surprise. You're serious?
Emily nodded. Grandpa, this isn't just about us anymore. This is about every person who's been manipulated like you were. The casinos play dirty, but now people are watching. A flicker of something new lit in Frank's eyes. Hope. For the first time in months, he didn't feel like a man who had lost everything.
He felt like a man who still had a chance to make things right. Over the next few weeks, Emily's story didn't fade. It grew. The casino's settlement led to larger investigations, with politicians and activists calling for new laws to protect vulnerable gamblers. Consumer protection agencies stepped in, demanding stricter regulations on casino marketing to seniors. Major news outlets ran special segments about gambling addiction and how casinos exploit psychological tactics to keep players spending. Emily was invited onto talk shows, asked to speak about what it was like taking on an industry so powerful. She wasn't interested in fame, she wanted change. And she got it. A new bill was introduced in Congress, the Fair Gaming Act, restrictions on casino incentives for seniors, mandatory gambling addiction warnings on all promotional material, regulations on how casinos handle life savings losses.
For the first time, the industry was being challenged on a national level, and Emily?
She became the face of the movement.
But the biggest change wasn't in the headlines. It was in Frank. For the first time in years, he felt like he had a purpose.
He volunteered at a local support group for seniors struggling with gambling addiction, standing up in front of men and women just like him. He told his story. He didn't sugarcoat it. He told them about the guilt, about the shame, about how it almost cost him everything, and then he told them about Emily, how his granddaughter refused to let him become another statistic. People listened, because Frank Dawson wasn't just an old man who lost money. He was proof that it wasn't too late to fight back, and for the first time in a long time he slept peacefully at night. It was a quiet evening when Emily and Frank found themselves sitting on a park bench, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The golden light reflected off the crisp autumn leaves, painting the sky in hues of orange and red. Frank looked over at Emily, a soft smile playing on his lips.
You know, he said, clearing his throat, for a long time, I thought I'd never be able to fix what I'd done. Emily glanced at him. You did fix it, Grandpa, more than you know. He shook his head. You fixed it. He reached into his pocket, pulling out something small. And I want you to have this. Emily looked down as he pressed a casino chip into her palm. She frowned. Grandpa, it's not what you think, he chuckled. I kept one, not to gamble, but to remind me. Emily traced the smooth surface of the chip, understanding dawning in her eyes. A reminder of what? She asked. Frank exhaled, his gaze turning to the sky. That I was lucky, he said quietly. Not because of the slots, but because of you. Emily's throat tightened. She turned, curling her arms around him in a hug. I love you, Grandpa, she whispered. He hugged her back, his voice steady for the first time in a long time. I love you too, sweetheart.
As the stars began to blink into the night sky, they sat in peace, knowing that this chapter of their lives had finally closed, not with defeat, but with redemption, and a promise that they would never lose each other again. Months later, Emily received a letter. The Fair Gaming Act has officially passed into law. A small smile spread across her face. It had been a long fight, but they had won. And somewhere, in the glow of a setting sun, an old man sat in his chair, holding on to a single casino chip, knowing that some risks are never worth taking unless it's for the ones you love.